Chris Pratt thought he signed up for a movie shoot. What he didn't expect was a real haunting. In a remote countryside tunnel long forgotten by time, something desperate to be heard stirred beneath the surface. And when Chris finally listened, it wasn't just a ghost story. It was a buried truth waiting to rise. If you believe some places, never forget the pain buried beneath them. Stay tuned to see how the story unfolds. The haunted ruin was the kind of place the earth tried to forget. The South Ridge train tunnel, now tucked beneath a canopy of overgrown trees and carpeted with years of fallen leaves, ivy crept like veins across the arching stone. Rust bled down iron supports, and nature had crept in through every crack, softening its edges but never erasing the truth buried beneath. Trains stopped running nearly a century ago. No one came here. No one, until the glamorous Hollywood film crew did. One fateful day, just after dawn, the first truck landed at the haunted ruin, tires crunching gravel and splitting the stillness. A white box rig with set lighting department stenciled on the side in fading red. Behind it, trailers, production vans, director chairs, dolly tracks, and people spilled onto the forgotten land like a parade of modern absurdity. Voices laughed, radios buzzed as crew members unpacked gear onto the damp, uneven ground. At the center of it all was Chris Pratt, disembarking from a sleek, matte black SUV. He surveyed the landscape with a mixture of curiosity and sarcasm. "Well," he smirked to his assistant, sunglasses glinting, "if this place doesn't scream Oscar bait, I don't know what does." The crew laughed. By noon, the set was still alive. Chris Pratt sat in a canvas chair marked Protagonist, flipping through the day's call sheet. A wardrobe stylist knelt beside him, adjusting his jacket collar. "The tunnel gives me chills," she muttered under her breath. "That's just the wind, or your paycheck," Chris joked, not looking up. Behind the lens, the cinematographer barked numbers to his crew, while a line producer argued with a sound tech about battery logistics. Near the director's tent, someone cursed over a misplaced light meter. Every delay added dollars. "Let's tighten this up. Location fees go up after we exhaust the days we paid for," snapped one of the producers. The tunnel was beautiful on camera. It had texture, history, mood. But none of that mattered if it meant overtime. 3 takes max for each shot, someone whispered. "Budget's already tight." Just after lunch, the sound team set up directional microphones near the mouth of the tunnel. But as the tech guy leaned in to test the feed, he froze. "Did you hear that?" he asked no one in particular. "What?" came the reply through the headset. "A breath. Like someone exhaling. Really close," the tech guy responded. He rewound the tape, but the sound was gone. Inside the director's tent, a monitor flickered. It was a wide shot of the tunnel entrance. The picture fuzzed for a second, glitched, then cleared. In that flicker, something had moved across the frame. A blur, pale, feminine. Shortly after the actors were called to position, a prop gun laid out neatly on a crate was now missing. Chris Pratt, in costume, looked around. "Who moved my gear?" he asked. No one had touched it. They found it later, inside the tunnel, resting on the center rail. The assistant director shrugged it off. "We're all running on caffeine and cold sandwiches. Weird stuff happens when you're tired." But it wasn't just tired minds. Something was watching. By mid-afternoon, Chris Pratt had heard enough of the muttering and the subtle unease that trickled like water through the crew. "Let me guess," he said, arms folded as he stepped out of the makeup trailer. "Ghosts again? Someone call Scooby-Doo, please." A few nervous chuckles followed. "Guys, this place is a 100-year-old ruin. It creaks, it echoes, and our equipment's from 2020, which means it glitches." He grinned, tossing a protein bar wrapper into a nearby bin. "Don't make it weird, or worse, viral." But even as he played it cool, something was nagging at him. During a location scout, he had taken a short walk with the director to explore alternate shots. That's when they stumbled upon it. The well. Half hidden by ivy and thick brush, the stones were mossy and cracked, like bone peeking through soil. The cover had long since rotted away, leaving only a black, yawning mouth. Chris had stepped closer, curious, then stopped. He didn't hear anything. Then he turned to the director and said half-jokingly, "That thing looks like it's got opinions." What would you do if something ancient stared back at you with silence? Tell us in the comments. The tunnel had tolerated their presence at first. A flicker here, a whisper there, just enough to be dismissed. But now, it wanted to be heard. By the time they began filming, the air around the tunnel had turned colder. Not because of the weather, but something else. As if the ruin itself had grown tired of being ignored. Footage shot inside the tunnel came back laced with digital warping, frames stretching like melting wax, faces twisting grotesquely in single frames before snapping back to normal. The audio? Whispered voices where there should have been silence. A scream layered beneath a scene of laughter. Chris reviewed the playback on his monitor and frowned. "That's not our sound design, right?" the audio engineer stammered. We didn't add that." The director shrugged it off. "Compression glitch. We'll reshoot." But the reshoots never went right. Every take inside the tunnel was disrupted. Lights burst mid-scene. Sound packs failed. Then the accidents began. One camera assistant swore the lens moved on its own. The grip narrowly avoided a heavy light rig that came crashing down from its mount. The stunt double for Chris sprained his ankle after tripping on ground that minutes before had been cleared and smooth. Even Chris wasn't spared. During one reset, a loose plank from the scaffolding scraped across his arm, drawing blood. "Did someone rig this right?" the assistant director snapped. Silence answered her. The crew was rattled. Some whispered that the place was cursed. Others, veterans of horror sets, dismissed it as stress and bad luck. But every time the wind shifted through that tunnel, it carried something colder than air, and it watched them. The well, tucked off to the side, hidden in shadow, seemed to pulse with unseen life. No one approached it anymore, not after the lighting guy vomited just from standing too close. Behind the scenes, the production office grew frantic. Insurance questions, equipment replacements, extra security. Still, the director clung to the schedule with trembling hands. "We finish this," he growled, "or we burn the budget for nothing." But numbers and contracts couldn't explain what happened next. As dusk fell like a shadow curtain, Chris stood alone at the tunnel's entrance, reviewing lines on his tablet. That's when he heard it. A voice. Not booming or theatrical. No, soft, breathless, urgent, whispering his name from deep within the blackened hollow of the tunnel. "Chris." He turned, heart halting mid-beat. No crew, no echoes, just darkness. And yet, the voice had known his name. With cameras rolling, crew watching, and a $500,000 setup hanging in the balance. He dropped the script, turned to the director and said, "We're done for today." Not because he was scared, but because he needed time to process the escalating pressure on himself and the crew. Would you keep filming if the tunnel started whispering your name? Don't forget to hit that like button. Sleeping wasn't the best option for Chris. The voice in the tunnel now visited him. It started with the dreams. Short flashes at first, bare feet on moss-covered stone, bloodless hands reaching through fog, a voice whispering his name with unbearable sadness. Chris would jolt awake in his trailer, drenched in sweat, breath caught like it didn't want to leave his lungs. He brushed it off the first night, blaming long hours and a bad burrito. But the second night, the dream returned, longer, clearer. A woman's silhouette, drenched in grief, standing beside an old stone well. Her eyes, hollow, pleading, fixed directly on him. And this time, she spoke not her name, but a date. October 19th. Help me. Chris woke up trembling. That date meant nothing to him, or so he thought. But as he flipped through his old calendar later that morning, his personal one he rarely looked at anymore, his hand froze. October 19th was the anniversary of his brother's death, a car crash that still echoed in his ribs whenever silence lingered too long. The light-hearted Chris, the joker of the set, began to slip. His jokes grew forced, his focus fragmented. While the crew griped about budget overruns and bizarre accidents, Chris found himself staring at the tunnel longer than he should, as if something was staring back. He began to feel it constantly, an invisible pull from the darkness inside. Not malevolent, but sorrowful, intentional. The ghost wasn't haunting the set. It was trying to tell him something. A scarf once tied to a prop bench was found beside his trailer door. Old film footage mysteriously edited itself overnight. One clip showing Chris walking the tunnel, alone, only to have a faint feminine figure appear behind him for just a frame before vanishing. Only he could hear the whispers now. His nights were no longer restful, his mind no longer quiet. And somewhere deep inside, a fire was lit. The same one that had once made him fight for his brother's justice, now burning for a spirit who had no voice but his. Would you follow a ghost's cry for help if it brought you face to face with your own haunted past? Comment if you believe the dead don't stay silent when justice is undone. The well was one of the soots in the location that Chris never wanted to go close to, but he suddenly kept returning to it, like gravity had changed its rules just for him. One fog-draped morning, he found himself there again, alone. No camera crew, no call time, just silence and that strange thrum in the air, like breath held too long. Then he saw it, wedged between the stones at the well's edge. A scrap of paper, aged and crumbling, ink smeared by time. 4 words scratched in frantic haste. "She's not beneath me." His pulse quickened. Suddenly, a gust of wind spiraled up from the well's mouth, carrying with it the scent of lavender and damp earth, his mother's perfume, the one she wore the day they buried his brother. Chris stumbled back, breath stolen. Then, an image only him could see appeared. Not a hallucination, but a projection. A narrow corridor, a door with a broken cross etched into its surface. And then, the feminine face again, those same hollow eyes, lips parting as if to scream, before vanishing. From the mouth of the well, a thin trickle of dark water began to flow, snaking along the cracked cement, winding like a trail, leading away. He followed. Through overgrown paths behind the lot, past discarded props and rotting set pieces, deeper into a forgotten section. And all the while, she guided him, not with words, but with fragments. Faint echoes, fleeting glimpses, symbols scorched into wood. A low hum only he could hear, growing louder at intervals. Chris followed through a rusted service door behind a warehouse. The hinges screamed as it opened, revealing stairs swallowed by dust and darkness. He descended with a flashlight and instinct. The basement was thick with mildew and memory. Then, behind a collapsed shelving unit, he found it. A stack of brittle newspapers, bound by twine and time. One headline stopped his breath. A lady vanishes in the Southridge train tunnel. Search abandoned after 48 hours. No photo, just a name, Lila Verne, and a short article citing unreliable eyewitness accounts, unconfirmed reports of a domestic incident, and ongoing investigations. But Chris had already seen how quickly such investigations ended. Chris bolted back to camp, hands trembling. The director was reviewing footage, clueless. "We need to shut this down," Chris said, voice cutting the air like a blade. "Pack up, get everyone out, now." The director laughed it off until Chris slammed the old newspaper onto the desk. His face changed. "You're serious?" "I've seen enough to know we're standing on something rotten. This set isn't haunted. It's hiding a crime." Chris couldn't hold back. After exiting the set camp, Chris didn't rest. He drove into the hills, to the aging village that had once supplied him extras, and set builders located close to the tunnel. Door after door shut in his face, until one elderly man, half blind and drunk on bitterness, let him in. She was a firecracker, that Lila, the old man told Chris. She was smart, too smart. Never trusted that story about the boyfriend being responsible for her death. Fella couldn't hurt a fly. What do you think happened? Chris asked. The man went quiet. Then, finally, I think she found something she shouldn't have, down in that tunnel. Maybe she was followed. Maybe she was warned. But she didn't run. He leaned forward. And the well? That's not a grave. That's a message no one wanted read. Chris left with more questions than answers, but now he had a name, a place, and a purpose. The story of Lila Verne had never been finished, and Chris Pratt was going to find its final chapter. He decided to stick around the village to ask more questions. She rejected him, one woman told Chris from behind her curtain. He couldn't take it, killed her in a rage, dumped her like garbage, shameful. I heard he confessed, another man claimed in the pub, his breath thick with ale. But the sheriff let him off, said there was nobody. Can't try a man for a ghost. No one questioned it. No one wanted to. The story had become easy, neat, digestible. Chris felt the lie beneath it like a cold draft through a closed door. He thought of the scarf outside his trailer. Just then, he knew who to reach out to for help. Chris hadn't spoken to his nephew in weeks. His nephew still ran the dusty archive in town. I need a favor, Chris said over the phone, voice low. A cold case from this area. Girl named Lila Verne. There was a pause. Then, that name rings a bell. Give me a day. 24 hours later, he gave Chris a file, thin, yellowed, barely held together. Unofficial, the man warned. Lots of blanks. Had to pull some strings, he added. But this is everything the department had on file. If you ask me, it's sloppy. He wasn't wrong. The case file was a patchwork of contradictions and laziness. The coroner's report was missing. Witness statements were vague, some unsigned. There was no body, no murder weapon, no documented confession, just a conclusion. Presumed homicide, suspect, Thomas Hale, motive, romantic jealousy, case closed. Chris's hands tightened around the file. Something was off. Then the ghost returned, subtle but persistent. A sudden cold draft through the windshield, a flickering light. And when he looked back at the folder, a single page had slid out and landed at his feet. It wasn't part of the police report. It was an internal memo dated one day before Lila's disappearance. L. Verne has accessed restricted camera logs. Keep her out of the Southridge train tunnel. Dispose of tape if necessary. Avoid escalation. Chris stared at the paper, breath stilled. The tunnel, a warning, and a cover-up. Lila hadn't died in a fit of passion. She had seen something, and someone had made sure she never spoke of it. Driven now more by fury than fear, Chris returned to the well. He remembered the ghost's gestures, the slow glance, the downward gaze, the grief. He brought gloves and tools this time, and after an hour of careful searching along the well's mossy edge, his fingers found something buried just beneath the stones. A waterproof envelope, sealed and aged. Inside, a tape. He played it back at his place that night. Grainy footage flickered to life. Lila, pale and trembling, stared into the lens. If anything happens to me, it's not Tom. I saw something about the Southridge train tunnel. They tried to delete the footage, but I saved a copy. Please, don't let them erase me. Then the screen went black. Chris sat in silence. It was all there, the motive, the scapegoat, the warning. He felt the noose tighten. Tom Hale, the boyfriend, hadn't killed Lila. He had loved her and fled not from guilt, but from fear. Fear that whatever had taken her would come for him next. The footage haunted Chris. Lila's voice, barely a whisper on the tape, replayed in Chris's mind as he revisited the Southridge train tunnel. At some point, the scribbled note tucked inside the envelope with the tape crossed his mind. 3 words handwritten in shaky ink. Ask about Eliana. He took another look at it, then headed back to the village library. He pored over old clippings and local obituaries, connecting dots no one had bothered to before. Eliana, one of 3 workers whose bodies were never recovered, was killed in the tunnel collapse. No investigation followed, no lawsuits, just silence. But Eliana wasn't just a name. She was Lila's older sister. Chris's blood ran cold. It all snapped into place. Lila had come back to the area not as a production assistant, but as an undercover investigative journalist. She had used the production assistant job as a cover, digging into the collapse that took her sister's life. And she had found something. A connection, a cover-up, a crime. Local officials and the project partners had rushed construction to meet the commissioning deadline, bypassing safety inspections, ignoring structural warnings. Bribes were exchanged, reports vanished, and when the tunnel caved in and lives were lost, the incident was buried under press releases and silence. Lila hadn't just uncovered the truth, she had documented it, and she had planned to expose it all. Chris returned to the well, this time with purpose. He knew now it wasn't just where she died, it was where they killed her, and where she hid the final piece. With his nephew guarding the perimeter, Chris lowered himself into the narrow shaft. Every stone was slick with damp earth and time. Near the bottom, wedged behind loose bricks, his fingers found a rusted tin box. Inside, a USB stick, a faded ID badge, a second more damning video of Lila recording one of the project's executives making a quiet confession. Details about the structural faults, bribed inspectors, threats to keep quiet, names, dates, bank accounts. It was everything. Lila had exposed them, and they silenced her for it, but not anymore. Chris stood at the edge of the well after he got out, holding the evidence to the dying light. The ghost didn't appear. She didn't need to. She knew he would finish what she started. Share this if you believe no secret stays hidden forever.
Chris kept digging. He found out that Nathan Rourke, a regional tycoon, construction magnate, and one of the investors of the very film Chris was shooting. Publicly, he was charming, philanthropic, a titan of industry. Nathan Rourke had overseen the rushed tunnel project, signed off on ignored safety protocols, and used his deep pockets to make the bodies and the evidence disappear. When Lila got too close, he didn't just silence her, he erased her existence. Chris knew the risk of going after a man like that. Nathan knew people, owned people. He had the police chief on speed dial, local media in his pocket, and more lawyers than most cities. But Chris had something Rourke didn't, a voice the world still listened to. The night that Chris discovered Nathan's involvement, Chris didn't sleep. He spent hours thinking of how he would confront Nathan. The kind that would go live across his social media, streaming platforms, and the final scenes of the movie they were making. He picked Lila's footage, the buried truth, played it on screen, and then he spoke directly to the camera. This is not fiction. This is not a performance. This is real. A woman named Lila Vernay tried to expose a crime and was murdered to keep it hidden. I'm telling her story now because she can't, and because silence is complicity. The video exploded across the internet within hours. Nathan Rourke tried to fight back with press statements, legal threats, and paid denials, but it was too late. The court of public opinion had already judged him. Investigations were reopened. Whistleblowers came forward. Bribery trails were uncovered. By the end of the week, Nathan Rourke's empire was crumbling. Investors pulled out, board members resigned, and finally, police stormed his estate. He was arrested, not just for Lila, but for everything. Chris revisited the Southridge train tunnel and stood one last time at the well's edge after Nathan was put behind bars. The air was quiet now. No more whispers, no cold shadows, just peace. A single white feather drifted down from the trees above and landed at his feet. She was gone, and Chris was settled that her ghost was freed and that the truth would echo forever. Under public pressure and media attention, the site of the collapsed tunnel was declared a memorial zone. At the entrance of the tunnel now stood a plaque, in memory of Eliana Verne, Lila Verne, and all silenced by corruption. truth echoes, justice endures. Chris Pratt was no longer just the charismatic lead, the funny man with perfect timing in his movies. He was something more now, an actor turned activist, a storyteller who chose truth over comfort, a man who carried someone else's voice when hers was taken too soon. This is for Lila. For every truth buried deep, we will keep digging. He would always say during his movie premieres, truth never dies. No matter how deeply buried, justice will eventually be found. And that's a wrap. Subscribe for more stories like this and be sure to check out our video collection.